The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Our aim is to explore the fringe, lost civilizations, alternative science, the paranormal, and much more. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live or future guests via email or the live chat room. And remember to subscribe to us on iTunes. And now welcome to this week's edition of Where Did the Road Go?
And this week on Where Did the Road Go, we have with us Paul Davids, who has made a fascinating documentary, and we're gonna get right into talking to Paul. You there with us, Paul?
I am.
All right.
Thank you for having me.
And you have, before we get to the documentary, why don't you tell people a little bit about your history and the other stuff you've done, because it's quite fascinating.
Well, I've had a decades-long career in the entertainment business. I'm a graduate of Princeton University in psychology. I'm from back east. My father was a professor at Georgetown University in history. And I came to Hollywood and studied at the American Film Institute and got my foothold in the business with the original Transformers show, the cartoon show.
Right.
I was hired by Marvel to be production coordinator on 79 of those episodes, and I wrote some of them. So I knew Stan Lee in those days. And from there, I wrote 6 of the Star Wars books for George Lucas, sequels that were mainly geared toward young readers. Random House, Bantam put them out. And then Barnes & Noble did an adult version. And from there, I was executive producer of Showtime's rather famous movie called Roswell, about the 1947 UFO incident. And then in the last 10 years, I've done, I think, another 9 feature films, a number of them documentaries and a number of them dramatic films with actors, and a fair number of them released by NBC Universal to television and to DVD. The latest one, the Life After Death Project, has been one of the most challenging, eye-opening for me. It's been an incredible journey. And I do want your listeners to know that lifeafterdeathproject.com is sort of the central station for all of this, for the information and for the film.
Okay. And it did air on Syfy last month.
Right. It did. It's actually 2 films. It's the Life After Death Project, and it's the Life After Death Project 2 Personal Encounters. And we put them both into one DVD package, so we're putting it all out, together now. People can get it at the website. The national release is mid-July, but we actually have them now. So Showtime just showed the first one, but they certainly got us started. Okay,
all right. Did you say Showtime or Syfy?
Oh, I meant Syfy. I'm sorry. Showtime is the network that we did Roswell for.
Right.
This was Syfy, I was actually involved with another of my films earlier called The Sci-Fi Boys, which was the history of special effects in films. That's on Netflix.
Okay.
And Peter Jackson was involved with that. He helped me. He is sort of host of that as we go from the really early days of special effects when it was all very primitive and experimental into the digital age. And the principal character, the case study of the Life After Death Project is a man named Forrest J Ackerman, who was massively influential in the whole development of science fiction. He was born in 1916, so through the days of the silent movies, and he was a kind of a Pied Piper with his magazine. It's called Famous Monsters of Filmland. And it was read by everyone who eventually went into the business of fantasy, imaginative, science fiction, and horror films. So he influenced a lot of people that went on to make all of these movies that have grossed billions of dollars. So you'll learn about Forrest J Ackerman in the Sci-Fi Boys, along with Ray Harryhausen, who sadly passed away, I think it was March 7th, one of the great pioneers of special effects. And the third of the triumvirate, because these men were all friends, was Ray Bradbury. And we lost him recently, too, at age 92. So it really has been the passing of an era. Yeah. And I've been part of that whole era. And then with the death of Forrest Ackerman, that's when it occurred to me that maybe death wasn't the end. Some things happened.
Well, how did you feel about it before doing this? What was your belief on the afterlife and things like that?
Well, you know, like skeptic Michael Shermer likes to say, we're all for it, right? You know, who's against the idea of afterlife? You know, as long as some of those scarier Christian notions don't hold up, you know, for most people. I mean, I like to say that the Catholics, I think, have 4 pieces of real estate for this. They have heaven, hell, purgatory, and limbo, right? I don't know. I don't know about purgatory and limbo. And then we have the Hindus, who sort of believe in hundreds, thousands, or millions of heavens, right? There are all these different levels. And you have these, you know, debate among Jews as to whether they really believe in an afterlife or not. I've certainly found references to both heaven and Sheol in the Old Testament. So it's part of the tradition of really all the religions. Buddhism is the most... you know, I don't know that it embeds itself into Buddhism, but it's been part of human tradition. But that doesn't mean that everybody believes it. You know, that's faith. We live in a world of materialism and science and technology and, you know, so a lot of people want to say, well, why should we believe that anymore? And I didn't have any particular belief, you know, or really I hadn't delved into this field like I had the many other fields I've been involved in, but this thing touched me personally. I couldn't escape it. I say I didn't choose this theme for a movie. It chose me. And it really did, because somebody deceased really came knocking at my door, and I've never had anything like this happen to me before, Soraya. I want to make it really clear that this Life After Death project is all true. There's no fiction in here. It's honest. It's not exaggerated. For me, it's like a confession of real things that happened that are very hard to believe. I stand behind it all. And I want people to know that it comes out of the need to tell my fellow man and women what I think the case is now, that personality and consciousness does survive death, and even that after death communication really is possible. Like the spiritualists and the mediums told us, Arthur Conan Doyle, you know, over 100 years ago, and it all got debunked. You know, the baby got thrown out with the bathwater, and, you know, we brushed all that aside, right, as like witch doctor stuff. Well, I'm quite convinced there's really something there, and we ought to wake up and pay attention, and I hope science will. I don't expect to solve that problem quickly or single-handedly. Things move very slowly, and when you take a position like I do, you go against an army of debunkers. You know, you put yourself out there, you're open for everything they want to throw at you, because there's a lot of people that just, I don't know, they have a very fixed point of view that it can't be true, and therefore it isn't.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you know, that's what I'm trying to penetrate here. And it's been 4 years of work, and I have to say, I feel like I've had a lot of help from unseen people on this. I don't know how it's happened, but you know, I swear it's happened.
All right. Well, why don't we get into exactly what happened to you that set you off on this path?
All right. I think first, I need to tell you that there were 2 other fellows who had an incident related to Forrest Ackerman before this touched me. Forrest died December 4th, 2008. It was 2 minutes to midnight. He was 92. He promised us all he was going to make to 100, and he didn't keep his word, but, came close. His body gave out, but his mind never did. And he was a skeptic. He was an atheist. And I cornered him, and so did a couple other people before he passed, and said, what if it's wrong, Fari? People asked Houdini to give them a message, and he never did. Do you think, would you be willing to give it a try? And he said, look, don't expect it, he said, because I don't think there's anything after this life. But if I wake up to some great science fiction convention in the sky, he said, I'll be partying with Boris Karloff and Bela Lugosi and Peter Lorre and all my friends of the horror films, George Pal, the science fiction great, and my dear wife, Wendane. He said, but when the partying dies down, if it's possible to let you know, I'll drop you a line. Those were very prophetic words, because that's exactly what happened. Somebody unseen dropped me a line, literally a line. He was an editor, and it had to do with a document that was changed under impossible circumstances. One line that had a message once you figured it out. But first it happened to two guys named Mike McDonald and Ian Paul Johnston, Canadians. By the way, I'm going up to Canada in a couple of days to Toronto. I was invited to be a speaker at Idea City, their TED conference. So Canadians will get to hear what you're hearing now. But Ian Johnston and Mike McDonald had been invited to the big tribute for Fari at the Egyptian Theater in Hollywood, March 7th, 2009, a couple months after he passed. They had made a documentary film about him. They came into town. They were staying together at a hostel in Hollywood. They knew Fari well enough to know he had a wonderful sense of humor. This guy was into puns and wordplay, and he could just always make you laugh. You'd never get away with being too serious for very long around Fari. He would break you up. And so they had a playful attitude, even in death. And they went to his crypt at Forest Lawn in Glendale, and Mike rapped on the crypt, rap, rap, rap. And he said, Uncle Fari. No, it's me, Mike. Are you there? And Ian had a comment at that point, which is, Fari would always say when you went up to his house to visit his great collection of science fiction. Oh, he had a museum. He had 400,000 items from the movies and literature and paintings and everything. Everybody wanted to visit. It was called the Acker Mansion. And when you knocked to get into the Acker Mansion, he would always say over the loudspeaker, "Who dares disturb the sleep of the vampire?" And then he'd let you in, and you'd have a tour. Well, so Ian said, "Watch out! Maybe he'll tell you you're disturbing the sleep of the vampire." They were in a playful mood, and they filmed that. Some people would think, well, that's a pretty disrespectful thing to do, and they wouldn't do it to anybody but Fari. And they came back to the hostel they were at. And Mike wanted to post a blog about this. And with Facebook, if you want to post a blog, they come up with this little CAPTCHA code. We all know these codes where there's squiggle lines, and they're letters and they're numbers, and they're usually random. You have to type it, to prove that you're not a spammer. And he was in shock, because what came up as the CAPTCHA code was Ackerman 000. Like rap, rap, rap on the grave. Like he was just knocking right back at them. And they were aghast, and they started talking about what could it mean. And, Mike was kind of inclined to believe that it was a direct communication from Ackerman, and Ian was skeptical, but he was, mind boggled. And he said, is he really dead? And at that moment, his computer, the other computer, you see, it was down. The screen was black. It was asleep. And it talked to him. It burst out with a childlike voice saying, "Oh my gosh, no way." In response to his comment, is he really dead? And it was not logged on to the internet or YouTube. They were able to determine that "oh my gosh, no way" is an emoticon, one of those little animated characters. You can find it on YouTube.
Yep.
But he wasn't logged onto YouTube. He didn't have this in his hard drive. As he says, there was no reason for his computer to talk to him. And the fact that it was a childlike voice, he had on his home screen a picture of Forrest Ackerman when he was 4.5 years old. So the little boy's face, was there as part of the home screen, and it's like a little boy's voice that's coming at them. Well, they were freaked. And they told me that this had happened to them, because I was one of the speakers at the tribute. This was a huge tribute. Every seat was taken in the Egyptian theater. And, you had Ray Bradbury talking. You had Guillermo del Toro. You had John Landis. You had Rick Baker, who's won all those Academy Awards. Even Peter Jackson checked in from New Zealand by video. And little old me. I've made some science fiction films, so I knew Forrest. See, this is the thing. Over 40 years, he was like a dear, dear uncle, almost a second father to me. I first met him when I was, I think, 14 years old. I read his magazine, Famous Monsters of Filmland, every issue. It gave the secrets of doing monster movies. And I was a kid. I made my own with 8mm. It was before video. And I entered a contest. And I was a winner in a contest in the magazine. And he gave me national publicity. I had a very swelled head. I was convinced I was a producer, and I was 14 years old. I eventually became a producer. I decided to pursue Hollywood rather than medical school, which my parents would have liked for me. But Forrest had that great influence. So I knew his humor. I knew his style. I thought the thing with those guys was really weird. And I wondered if, as they say, was another shoe going to drop in this? Or was that it? Well, the other shoe dropped on me. I left L.A. after the tribute. I went to Santa Fe. We have a vacation home there. Wonderful place. And my wife couldn't come on the trip. I was alone there. And it was around March, I think it was March 18th was the actual date. It was getting close to tax time. Everybody's working on their taxes then. And I had a document that I printed out. It was 24 pages long of my meetings, my business meetings and phone calls of the previous year. So I could, help me with miles and deductions and all that stuff you got to do. Mm-hmm. So I pressed the print command on the printer, but I didn't wait for the whole 24 pages to print out. I left. I went to a nearby Indian casino, and I had some fun for about an hour and a half. So when I came back, the document had been printed. It was dry. It was normal. I looked it over. There was nothing strange about it at all. I wasn't expecting that. And the doors in the house are locked. I'm alone in the house. And I tossed this thing down onto the bed, the master bedroom. It's a pretty new house. We don't have leaks from the ceiling or anything like that. There was no source of moisture or liquid around. Mm-hmm. No spilled Cokes. So I put this document down on the bed, and I went into the bathroom for a few minutes. And when I came out, I got a shock that was like the equivalent of what happened to these guys. They're being shocked because a line in the document had been blacked out. And the ink or whatever it is it had been done with was still moist. So, it didn't happen with a computer printed it. It was wet. And it was precisely done. There were 4 words that were selected for this blackout. And it was even in 2 different levels of opacity or opaqueness, because the first 2 words you could slightly read and the last 2 were completely blacked out. So this was, I was in shock. This was outside, it's like, okay, where did the road go? My road was gone. My road was gone at that point. I was in the twilight zone.
And there's no way someone could have gotten in and done this.
No, there was no one in the house. Physically, there was no one there. So as of that split second, did I believe in ghosts? Did I believe in poltergeists or discarnate entities? Suddenly this became a real possibility for me, you see. Because you can narrow down the possibilities pretty quick because this thing is done deliberately. Mm-hmm. But here's the thing. I went to Princeton. I took the sciences. I took organic chemistry. I regarded this as evidence of something. And the message, I had no idea what it meant. Why those words? Because I looked up what were the words, and it made no sense to me that anybody, I thought, gee, if a ghost has come from another dimension to give me a message and has blacked out those 4 words, he sure made a mistake, or maybe he got the wrong address, because this doesn't mean anything to me, But it did later. It sure did later. But at that time, what followed, there was other weird stuff that happened. That happened the next day. I mean, it got like Alice in Wonderland. It got curiouser and curiouser.
And you didn't initially connect this to Forry at all, did you? No, except I did have in the back of my mind that those guys had something weird happen to them. Mm-hmm.
And also the fact that it was a line blacked out, and Forry was an editor, after all. He blacked out a lot of lines in his career. Who else did I know who had passed away recently who blacked out lines? So, it was just kind of an inkling at the moment, but really I was just frightened. And what compounded my fear was the fact that I had this pretty scary African mask in the next room, right around the corner from the bedroom, right on the opposite wall from where this happened. This was a tribal mask from Zimbabwe, which, for me, it was an art object. It was on loan to me from an old partner on another project. I got somebody in to check out the house with an electromagnetic field reader the next day after the ink thing happened. And the emanations of electromagnetism from that mask, and that it was so intense, it was just off the charts. The little machine was just beeping and the light going on. And, the really scary thing that I don't talk about all the time, but I will tonight, is that when we pointed that at my head that day, at that time, near that mask, the thing went off the scale too. There was some kind of electromagnetic field coming. It was like it was right out of my brain. The thing was beeping and the light, but it never happened again there. And we played with the wall switch. We pointed the thing right at the wall switch to see, okay, there's electricity and, if there's a fan on.
Right.
It didn't have to do with the wall switch. It wasn't going from there. And, I took the mask out of the house after this happened. But when it was there, having brought it back eventually, this has never happened again. So it was confined to that time, you see. And Forrest Ackerman, who was into horror, I mean, he wore Bela Lugosi's Dracula ring for decades. It had been a gift. It was one of his prize items. It sold for $40,000 at his auction. And King Kong and, everything was science fiction. He didn't believe any of this stuff is real while he was alive, but it was his trade. It was his Famous Monsters. He would have loved this mask. I mean, he had a collection of masks, a lot of them. And of everything in my house, this is conjecture, but what would have Forrest noticed? He would have noticed that mask. So then it turns out that the guy who owns the mask, he's taken slides all around the world. He's a world traveler. He's an entrepreneur. He owned a castle once. And he keeps all of his slides on carousel trays. Maybe the kids don't know what that is now with everything digital, but he used to take slides. You remember Kodachrome was the slides, and Ektachrome.
Mm-hmm.
So he had, hundreds of trays of slides, all in boxes. He kept it in a temperature-controlled storage unit, everything perfectly labeled. And he said, Paul, I took pictures of that when it was danced in Africa before I bought it from the natives. He was there on a trip with his wife. It was the first time his children met their grandparents. His wife is a white African from Zimbabwe, and it was homecoming for her. So those slides meant a lot to him because it was not only the dancing of the mask, but it was also the time that his kids first met the grandparents. And here's the thing. Those slides vanished. They are the only slides that vanished. The box is still there. It still says Africa, Zimbabwe, 1983. The carousel tray is still there. It even has the lock on top of it that locks the slides in. He swears he never would have touched those slides. He never would have moved them. He never would have let anybody touch them, and no one in his household would have had the audacity to touch them. They're his. They're gone. They're gone as of that day, and they have not shown up now, and it's several years later. So it's like, it starts to feel a little bit like black magic or something. It's worrisome. But we try to be skeptics. We try to say, okay, he lost them,
Right,
okay.
right.
There was a weird electromagnetic charge going through Santa Fe that day. You didn't know there was an electrical storm. Or, you look for things, but you run out of logical possibilities pretty fast.
Well, you can attribute a lot. You can attribute a lot to coincidence, but at a certain point, there are too many coincidences.
Yeah, and I did in the Life After Death project, and I hope everybody will see it and get it. The 2 DVDs and everything. And please don't go to the piracy sites. They drive me crazy. They steal our stuff. We're independent producers. We're trying to make a living like everybody else. People that make shoes don't have their warehouses open at night so people can come in and steal their shoes. But they do steal our movies, and you get viruses, in your computer when you go to them because they're all bad people. But nevertheless, I ask for your support if you're interested in this. But I went to one of the top chemists in the country with this. Indiana University, Dr. J. Siegel, chairman of the chemistry department, famous forensic chemist. He has testified in many criminal cases where people, whether they're going to go to jail or not, might depend on his testimony about chemical evidence. He said, I'll look into this. I'll try and tell you about your ink blot, or as he called it, the obliteration.
And you actually packaged this up and didn't touch it and did it very scientifically with the whole thing.
Yes. I know about chain of evidence. I didn't let the chain of evidence leave my hand. When he suggested that I FedEx it to him, I said, absolutely no way. This is worth the cost of a plane ticket to me. I'm going to hand deliver this. It's not going to leave my hands. It's not going to disappear, in FedEx or UPS or anywhere.
Right.
I'm bringing it to you. So he started with gas chromatography, and he wasn't satisfied with the results he was getting. They weren't telling him what he wanted to know, and that was unusual for him. And he had a colleague in New Jersey that they'd worked together in Michigan, University of Michigan, Dr. John Allison at the College of New Jersey, also chemistry professor. And so then he wanted me then to take it to Dr. John Allison for electron microscope work and everything else. He had all the equipment to do everything science can do with this. And the two men were going to confer on it together. But something strange happened in Dr. Siegel's lab that he found jarring. And I found jarring just because, something out of the ordinary happened. They had a computer there that they had closed down a certain program on, and it was asleep. And it was asleep because I had a camera rolling time, and you can see in the background it's asleep at a certain point. And then the computer not only woke up without any of the other computers around it waking up, but it opened the program that they had closed itself. And they knew they had closed it. It had no business opening that program, just like that other computer had no business saying, oh my gosh, no way.
Right.
So that happened to him. Now, let me tell you, when I went to Dr. Allison, what an adventure that was. Dr. Allison has taken this as his personal case. He has worked on it for 3 years. This is still a massive mystery to these top chemists. And they've gone on record. You'll see in the film their testimony that they cannot duplicate this ink blot. They cannot determine how it could have been done. And things about it just defy their scientific horse sense. So they did determine, you see, that the basic chemistry of it was the basic chemistry of the ink that was there on the page.
Okay.
Those ink molecules, but there were way too many of them because they could find no solvent, and they tried hundreds of solvents. They had hundreds of lab hours over 3 years. They made it class projects for one class, and then they graduate, and then the Paul David ink blot is a class project for the incoming class. And this was a major thing here, and they couldn't do it. And John said to me, I think he says this in the film, in the bonus features, he makes a long up-to-date statement, what's going on. He said, Paul, somebody brings me like this, everybody's a suspect. I'm looking for an answer, and I don't usually look in the realm of deceased people sending a message. That's not what we chemists do. We look for, rational, reasonable explanations. He said, but I can tell you, even if you had wanted to do this, I don't think you could have done it. We've tried every solvent that could have been, in your house, things known only to chemists. He says, I don't know how anybody did it. And clearly they did it in a short period of time. And it was very targeted. It was a message. I'll tell you about the message in a minute. But the other thing to know is that really weird stuff started happening to Dr. Allison. While I was in his house, and he was showing me lots of pages that he had the first attempts of trying to duplicate the ink blot, about 12 pages. He's talking to me about this, and in the background over his shoulder, there's a clock on the wall. And it's ticking, and suddenly you hear it chime. And he hadn't noticed that the clock was ticking, and his face suddenly sort of turns red or white. I haven't really checked out the color, but, he reacted, and he said, that clock doesn't chime anymore. He says it hasn't worked in years. And he said, he told me later, actually, a couple of years later, he said the clock has never worked again. It's never chimed again. He says it had to be wound up. He hadn't wound it up. His wife was away on a trip, and she didn't know how to wind it up. They don't have a housekeeper. No one, human, wound up the damn clock. And the chiming was caught right on my camera. It just happened to be. So that was one thing that happened to him.
Oh, yeah, you can definitely see him jump when it goes off.
Yeah. Yeah, he's investigating my case, and so he starts, it's like he's got a poltergeist now living with him. Now, the reason I tie it to Forrest Ackerman, who I love, by the way, and if Forrest wants to visit me as a poltergeist, he's welcome. My door is always open to him, but he doesn't need an open door. He can come right through it, obviously. So here's what happened. He took a bunch of these pages that day that we were at the lab, where he tried to duplicate it, and he put them on a chair, and he tucked them under his briefcase in a dining room. And he went to like me, he went to the bathroom for a couple of minutes. I mean, it's no crime. People have to go to the bathroom. And in his case, I think it was in the morning, and he was shaving and getting dressed. So he came down stairs, and those pages were now scattered across the dining room floor. And I mean scattered. They didn't just fall off that chair. He satisfied himself with that. He put them on the chair, and he tried to see what happens if they just fell, or if he'd put them close to the edge by mistake, but he knew he hadn't. And there was nothing there that could have scattered the pages. There's no wind, there's no open windows, there's no draft from a chimney, there's no fans, there's no animals. There's no one there to scatter the pages. Now look, this scattering of the pages behavior is also happening in the Acker Mansion, where Forrest Ackerman lived. That 18-room house that was the museum of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and had 400,000 items from the movies and literature. And, it had Dracula signed by Bram Stoker and, lots of other. It had the original edition of Frankenstein, signed by Mary Shelley.
Wow.
He had it all. And they completely remodeled the house when he left. And there were tenants living there. I went over to interview them, and they told me this house is haunted. They said, we call him Victor. That was the name they gave to their ghost. And they told me all the things that happened. I mean, one of the first nights there, a bat flies into their bedroom. There's no bats that fly into bedrooms in, the Los Feliz district of Los Angeles. That happened. And the fellow who was living there, Justin, would see the shadow of a man, the shadow on the wall, moving across the room. But there was nobody there. But it was clearly a man's shadow. Freaked him out. And then the lady that is the lady that's there, she's a singer, and she rehearses right near Forrest's old office. She's got a music stand. And when she goes out of the room late at night, she's rehearsing. She goes to get a glass of wine or make a phone call. She says she comes back, and her music pages are often scattered across the floor, like somebody threw them. Again, there's no windows. There's no natural explanation for it. So, look, any junior detective, are you listening to me, Skeptic Society? Are you listening here? Any junior detective can put this together. You don't need to jump to conclusions to say, if you've got this scattering of pages happening with the scientist who's investigating the case in New Jersey, and you've got it happening in the house where the man lived, and he's talking to the Canadian filmmakers with their computer and leaving a message for me. And then I want to tell you, it's been years now. He's done lots of other stuff too. You can put two together and say this is somehow connected with Forrest J Ackerman. It's the kind of thing that he would have done. So I know the Skeptic Society doesn't believe in ghosts. I'm a friend of Michael Shermer. He is the president of that society. He publishes Skeptic magazine. I have sat down with him for hours, and I've given him all the facts on this. I don't know what he's going to write about it, but it's a challenge to him. So, Michael, you got to take this seriously. There's witnesses, there's evidence. None of this is made up. I know you don't want to believe in ghosts, but, there comes a point where you have to cry uncle, maybe. Uncle Fari, that's what we called him. Called him Uncle Fari. So I'm into this, this tiff sort of with the skeptics, and that's okay. They can say whatever they want. I'm still going to be here saying the truth, and I'm going to win because I know I'm telling the truth, and I insist that science hear me. I want this in Scientific American, and the other thing is, of course, the Huffington Post printed a story about this. And the writer really wanted it in the science section. But no, where did they put it? They put it in the weird news section.
Well, of course.
Of course, because, in the society we live in, this can't be science. And that's wrong.
Well, especially if some of the research you had done on this. But let's get back to that in a minute. We got to take a quick 45-second break. And we will be right back on Where Did the Road Go?
The opinions expressed by the host and guests on Where Did the Road Go are their own and do not represent those of WVBR or its management. Join us on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com, where you can send us questions for our live guests via email or the live chat room. You can also check out our upcoming schedule, blog, links section, book reviews, videos, and links to our Twitter, Facebook, iTunes, and much more. That's wheredidtheroadgo.com.
And tonight at Where Did the Road Go, we've been talking to Paul Davids, who's telling us about his latest documentary. And sorry to cut you off there real quick, but we were talking about the way science deals with this type of stuff.
Yeah. For those just tuning in, it's the Life After Death Project, and the place to go is lifeafterdeathproject.com.
And that is the only place people can get it right now, correct?
Yeah, because it doesn't come out nationally till July 16th, but it's my website, and they've come into our warehouse, and we're sending them out to people that order right now. And it's 2 movies. There's also the sequel. The first one was on Syfy, as we said, and then there's the sequel that has lots of cases in it and takes the whole case, the whole issue of life after death farther, because there's so many different ways you can talk about it and study this kind of evidence. You've got a lot of 3-letter acronyms in this field. You've got NDE for near-death experience. You've got EVP for electronic voice phenomena. You've got ITC, which is what interests me the most, which is Instrumental Transcommunication. And that is based on the theory that if there are disincarnate entities, as we like to call them, rather than ghosts, and if they are bright like we are, then they can use our technology to communicate with us. But we have to learn how to communicate, and their messages might not be quite what we understand right away. And we have work to do to learn about all of this, because there's a lot of evidence that this is happening. There's physical evidence, like my ink blot. There's some really good photographic evidence. I mean, there's one case I bring up in the movie with Lynn Katai, a medical doctor in Phoenix, who's got just this incredible Polaroid picture that was taken of a kitten They used to have a kitten with her mother, and her mother died. And 10 years to the day from when her mother died, they take a Polaroid picture of the new kitten they got, just like the old one they had. And her mother's hand shows up in the picture, transparent. You can see through it. Now, it's not a double exposure because you can't double expose with an iZone Polaroid.
Right.
For you, some of your listeners might be, too young to remember. We used to rely on Polaroid for instant photography, and it was a chemical process. And you had to peel the thing back and see your picture. You couldn't double expose. So here's her mother's hand. And why does she know it's her mother's hand? Because her mother had crippling arthritis, and her right hand was slightly deformed. And you see the deformity in the transparent hand cupping the kitten on the picture that was taken exactly 10 years to the day from her mother's death.
And you show that picture on the documentary as well.
Yeah. And she's a medical doctor. Come on. So, the case, it builds. Now, some of these things are synchronicities. And synchronicities, Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, came up with that term. And he was trying to express something more than mere coincidence. Coincidences happen to everyone. But a synchronicity is a kind of super coincidence where there's a juxtaposition in time and place of disparate things that trigger a very specific emotional response in the person that sees it and that it happens to. Now, can that be a coincidence too? Yes, it can. But they can be really doozies. And when you start to get dozens of synchronicities, like we have in the Ackerman case, you have to ask if it isn't somebody doing something intentionally. I want to just give you a couple of examples of the synchronicities. Okay. It's a different class of the evidence from the physical, and then we have mediums too to talk about. Okay, yes. Look, with the ring he wore, it sold for $40,000 in an auction, a state auction. And as I said, one of those Canadian filmmakers who rapped on the grave, he lived in Halifax, Canada. It's a pretty, out-of-the-way place for most of us Americans would think. Well, that ring, over the course of a year, we're not sure if it was resold a couple times and changed hands a couple times. Somebody thinks it was. But it ended up in a display case in a gallery on a street in Halifax that is exactly 100 feet from the front door of Mike McDonald, who rapped on Fari's Crypt. I mean, this ring traveled from California to go 100 feet from his door in Halifax, where it's on display for exactly one day, and that's the day that he happens to walk by and he sees it in the window, mind you, on a sculpted hand of actor Boris Karloff's hand. There's the ring. So, that's one kind of example. Now, here's another example. I told you I was a winner in the Famous Monsters movie contest back when I was like 14 years old. Okay. And Fari sent me a letter that had great emotional significance to me because he wrote on it, to master movie maker Paul Davids. Here, I'm a 14-year-old kid, and Fari Ackerman, my hero in Hollywood, is calling me a master movie maker. He's telling me that I was a winner in the contest. He publishes scenes from my childhood movies in his magazine. It was heaven. But he chooses the stamps very carefully he puts on the envelope. And he's got 4 Santa Fe stamps on there. And he's got an Edgar Allan Poe stamp, plus a special delivery stamp. Now, he's got Poe and Santa Fe. Now, here's why that is so troubling to me, in a pleasing kind of way, actually. I told you about The Mask from Zimbabwe with its incredible EMF readings, electromagnetic field readings. When we filmed that with the EMF going off the charts, there was a case of EVP on our video. There was no one there who uttered the word Lenore, but you hear the word Lenore while we're moving this EMF reader around. Well, maybe you've got a cousin named Lenore, or maybe somebody has a girlfriend named Lenore, but, most educated people, and certainly anybody who knows Fari Ackerman, when they think of Lenore, they're going to think of Edgar Allan Poe's poem called Lenore. And if you know The Raven, you know that the lost love being mourned for by the person who is telling the story and is visited by the raven is named Lenore. Lenore is very specific to Edgar Allan Poe. So, 40-some years ago, Fari sends me an envelope that has Santa Fe and Edgar Allan Poe. 40 years later, there's an incident in my house in Santa Fe that involves paranormal stuff and Edgar Allan Poe.
I think it's important to make clear to people, too, that this is the type of thing that Forrest would do in real life.
Yes, if he could have known about it, to figure it out. Of course, I'm not suggesting that Forrest 40 years ago knew that something was going to happen 40 years later, so he chose these particular stamps. You know, it's like the universe does this somehow. It's like, this is why it's called a synchronicity. It's like waves or ripples or echoes of events that are coming back to us. And you can say, yes, you know, to haunt us, but they have meaning, and that's what makes it a synchronicity. Here's another one from just last week, all right?
Okay.
About 20 years ago, Fari signed a postcard. It has a picture of him as Frankenstein on it, his head. An artist drew. And this postcard was signed, Warmest Wishes Winner, Paul, from Fari. And this postcard never went anywhere. It stayed in a file. He may have done other postcards like this. Maybe it was winners of another contest or something. But the one to Paul never got sent out. And someone who wanted to get their copy of the movie right away the day I got it, and they were going to come over and pick it up from me. They looked in a file cabinet for something else first. And what drops out of the file but this postcard that says, Warmest Wishes Winner, Paul, from Fari. And he said, oh my God, I started out all this as a skeptic, but why am I finding this postcard right now? I'm on my way to Paul's house. Obviously, Fari wants Paul to have this. And winner, of course, that's my first association with him, as a winner in his contest. It's really weird. So the skeptic, of course, is going to say, nice coincidence, might have made good material for Rod Serling, in the Twilight Zone, but not anything that really means anything. Well, I got to say, there's so much here I don't know anymore.
Well, that's the thing. You seem to present any one of these things could be a coincidence and could be easily dismissed as a coincidence. When you start adding them all up, they start to it makes it too much of a coincidence that all these things are happening.
Let me give you one more, Sarai, that was just a shock. The same guy that brought this over to me, he's from Hawaii. He got married in Hawaii. And it happened that Fari was one of the 7 people at his wedding. And he chose a certain kind of wine for the wedding. It was in 2004. It was a rare Spanish vintage. Now, he was helping me on the music editing for the film up at Big Bear Lake, California. And my wife came up for the weekend. And we have about 40 bottles of wine here, I think, that have been gifted to us through the years. And she had taken a bottle of wine she intended to give to somebody that just, had a baby. She went over to visit them, but she forgot the bottle of wine in the car. So it was still in the car when she drives up to Big Bear, and she brings it into the house, and damned if it isn't the same vintage wine he served at the wedding that Fari Ackerman was at, but it's even 2004, which was the year of the wedding. Okay, now, I've told you about 4 of these right now. I want to tell you I have 25 of them.
Nice.
This keeps happening. And it's not just the synchronicities and the physical things. There's also, I know we're getting close to the end, so I want to tell.
We can go a little longer if you want.
Okay. 2 other kinds of evidence here that Gary Schwartz, one of my favorite scientists, University of Arizona, Tucson, he talks about. As he says, you're dealing with life after death. You're dealing with physical anomalies, often things that happen after somebody dies that seem like they're a message from. You're dealing with synchronicities. And you want to ask, have these things really occurred? Are we interpreting them correctly? He says, then there's evidence from mediums. Now, the 4th category is this instrumental transcommunication. It's actual communication with our technology. And Gary has researched both of them. He's from Harvard. He's a PhD from Harvard. He taught at Yale, psychology, psychiatry, surgery, and he's done research for over 15 years in life after death at the University of Arizona at Tucson with university support. He started with research with mediums. And of course, we all have to be wary, when it comes to mediums, because nobody wants to be the victim of false information. Nobody wants to be taken advantage of or used for money or whatever it might be. So, mediums, the mainstream, they're not interested in what mediums have to say.
Right.
Your average New Yorker who works in a high rise and has a respectable job and has a lot of responsibilities, who walks past one of these palm reading things, with a medium offering to tell your future, he's not going to look twice, and most people don't. But Gary has determined that there are, in fact, some mediums that really do have a gift that can't be explained, and those are the ones he's interested in. So he's weeded out, it's the wheat from the chaff. He's interviewed a lot of people, has gotten rid of a lot of people who think they have an ability but don't. But the ones that come to him are usually so convinced that they have this talent that they're willing to be scientifically tested. Now, he got me involved with two of the mediums he's worked with. One is Catherine Yunt, who is in Tucson. She was a math teacher. Math teachers have their head on the ground, okay? Mm-hmm. They can do things with numbers that, you can't do, that I can't do. So, but she also communicates with, she has a sort of a spirit guide. And he called her up. He said, there's a man in town. I'm not going to tell you his name, anything about him. He wants to have a session with you. I'm going to come over. We'd like to video it. Do we have your permission? There's somebody he would like to see if you can contact for him. So she says yes. And the only thing he tells her is that the person I'm interested in hearing from, his name is Forrest. Well, I filmed that hour. And this is another thing I just have to say. You have to see the Life After Death project. Mm-hmm. Get it? And so I have done an honest editing of her hour. And it is incredible how accurate it is to Fari. And the skeptics jump all over me. They say, wait a minute, how many hits were there versus how many minutes? You've edited that. It has no scientific value if you edited it. And I say, nonsense. I spent an hour with her. I couldn't give you the whole hour. What I took was very representative of what she said, and she came up with things very specific to him that she couldn't have known unless she had some source of information that none of the rest of us do. And she had no foreknowledge or warning on this. The other psychic is from Israel, Orit Ishyemini Tomer, and I came to see her months later when she came in from Israel to Tucson to do some research with Gary, and her reading was astonishing. And there's one from Australia, Glenys Mackay, who also came up with some things, that I didn't know. Two of the psychics came up with things I didn't know that I thought that's probably wrong or it doesn't mean anything. And then they were validated later by people that looked at the footage and knew Fari, and they said, oh my God, she's talking about his housekeeper that lived with him for 15 years. Oh my God. And then the other one, the one from Israel, she saw that this man she was talking about, she knew that she said he reads science fiction, he's into writing, he's into publishing. She said he collects strange little dolls, right? She didn't have the word for monster in English, but she said these little, weird little dolls, She told so much about him. And then I said, what about women in his life? She says, there's one woman. She said, I saw this immediately. There's one woman close to him who knows everything. I think it's his wife. Yes, well, he had a wife of many years, Wendane Ackerman. And then she says to me, yes, and her name begins with an M. She says it's an M, or maybe it's an N. She says it's in Hebrew like it's the same, M or N. That's his wife. And I said, well, we got a miss here, because you see, he was married to Wendane Ackerman, and that is a W. So unless she's standing on her head and she sees the W upside down, all right, we got a miss here. So what happens? Months later, I'm editing the footage, and I talked to somebody who knew the wife much better than I did, and says, oh, well, Wendane wasn't her real name. Fari gave her that name. You know, she was Malka. As a matter of fact, she was sometimes called Matilde, and occasionally called Mondel. 3 versions of her middle name, all beginning with M. So the psychic from Israel was right. I didn't have the information even in my brain to know. Where does she get this from? If she's not getting it from Fari, you see. If he's not directing this. Is he taking the slides from the African mask, to make a point? Is he doing all this? Is this all some sort of vast puppetry? I don't know. There's been so many things. And then we get to the lab in Tucson. We get to Gary Schwartz and his computers. He has developed a system with software for attempting to communicate with discarnate entities.
And this is not completely different from what people might see on like Ghost Hunters or Ghost Adventures, where they use electronics to get responses, but it's done in a very scientific manner.
Well, it's done in a laboratory, and it's specialized software that's a bar graph. And the thing that separates all this from the Ghost Hunter stuff is they go into haunted houses or graveyards or creepy places, and they don't know who's there. They don't know. Maybe somebody's communicating with them. They have no idea what it is. There's no relationship. Whatever it is, it's just spooky and superficial.
Right.
But here, we're dealing with people that were known to us when they were alive. And they're doing things that are consistent with their knowledge and their personalities. And they're, in Fari's case, certainly with his sense of humor. And Gary asks the entity to choose his signal on the bar graph. In other words, he's measuring very fine bits of radiation, like gamma radiation, or just a few photons of light in absolute pitch blackness, and is look for variance in that, an increase in the radiation when he asks a question as an acknowledgement. And he has a formula to filter out the noise so that he knows he's working way above just random noise. Mm-hmm. And Fari picked, as when he was asked for his identifying mark, was what Gary calls a triple, meaning it's at the level of 3 bursts of energy on the bar graph. And he doesn't often see triples. It's a lot more, it's rarer to see a triple than, a double and then a 1, for example. So he starts communicating with Fari, asking him questions, and triples are coming up. Time to be answers as though the answer is yes. If there's nothing that happens in 45 seconds, he assumes the answer is no. But I filmed this in real time in his lab. You can see it in my movie. I'm telling you, folks, this is historic. No one has, to my knowledge, I don't think anybody has done anything like this before. Gary will tell you there has not been another case like this before. And it is a real challenge to the skeptical community. And I just hope they're men enough not to just knee-jerk dismiss this with their usual, stuff. Coincidence, there's a lot of coincidences. Doesn't convince me, I'm an atheist. Come on now. Wake up. Snap out of it. You don't really believe this stuff, do you? You know how they are.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So that's my story. I invite people to go to lifeafterdeathproject.com. Please support this effort if you're interested. This is how we independent filmmakers survive. We need your support. We need to sell DVDs. It doesn't come from the Syfy channel or these other channels, unless we get lucky and sell it all around the world. We need your help in order to keep doing this. And I think we've got a really quality product, and I think you will be amazed, and you'll like the sequel as much as the original.
Well, you're on WVBR FM Ithaca. This is the last. This is Where Did the Road Go? You mind going a few more minutes so we can clear up exactly what the ink and everything was?
Oh, yes. You want to know what the message was?
Yes, I think. And one of the things I wanted to mention earlier, Fori had a very practical, joking sense of humor as well as liking puns and stuff, correct?
Yes, he was into wordplay. He was a linguist. He loved Esperanto as the language that was going to unite mankind, that idealism. And he always did puns in his magazine, and he would always look for a word within a word or a name within a word. And in my research for figuring out what the blacked out words meant, I have found 15 examples easily where he has made a joke out of the fact that there's a word that has a name in the middle of it, or another word in the middle of it, like the word hooray, H-O-O, and then you've got the name Ray. And so many examples that was one of his signature items. Well, the words that were blacked out were "spoke to Joe Amodi." Now, spoke to Joe Amodi. Elsewhere on the document, a couple entries earlier, I had typed left message for Joe Amodi on a different day. I called the guy, left a message for him, but whoever blacked out the document didn't block out left message for. They chose spoke to. And it so happens that Fari's closest caretaker, closest friend for the last 10 years or so of his life is a man named Joe Mo. He's Hawaiian, Joe Mo. They were just close as could be. It was Joe who planned the tribute. Now, I didn't know this at the time, what I'm telling you. When my ink thing happened, I hadn't talked to Joe since the tribute. But after the tribute, when I finally did get in touch with Joe, the first thing he tells me is that he had an apparition of Fari. He had a very strange experience of Fari coming into his bedroom and in his own special, humorous, mischievous way, thanking him for the tribute and saying that it was the ninth wonder of the world. Fari would never have said eighth wonder of the world because that's King Kong if you're in this business. You don't take away from King Kong. You don't want to get into an argument with King Kong. So King Kong's the eighth. The tribute for Fari was the ninth wonder of the world. That's what Fari said to Joe. Joe said, "Look, Paul, I'm a skeptic. Could this have been a dream?" He said, "It could have been a dream, but it didn't seem like it. It was super real. Absolutely. It was like Fari was there and he was in my room." And he said, "And when I woke up from this, whether it's an apparition or a reverie or a dream, everything looked the same. I didn't even have to blink. Everything in my room was just like it was when Fari was there, but Fari was gone. No more. He's not there anymore." So at this moment, when I hear this, it dawns on me. Fari has crossed out, spoke to Joe Amodi. He's telling me, "Paul, I spoke to Joe Mo." Mo is right there in the middle of Amodi. And I think it was just a way of saying goodbye and telling me that he'd acknowledged, how much he loved the tribute. So, Paul, you want to know how much I love the tribute? I spoke to Joe. I've already told him. You'll hear it from Joe. It was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Paul, for the things you had to say. And then he thanks me again with this card that shows up that he signed 20 years ago, now given to me, "Warmest wishes, winner, Paul from Fori." You can't tell me this is not meaningful. And I want to say that just like science one day woke up to the fact that the world isn't flat, it's round, but it took us a long time to get there. We had to see the evidence of ships out at sea with the hulls disappearing first and figure, why would that happen? Are they falling off the end of the flat Earth? Or is the Earth round? And just like we didn't believe in aviation, it wasn't possible for a machine to get up in the air. As a matter of fact, after the Wright brothers flew for the first time, nobody believed them for a long time. Only the people that were at Kitty Hawk who saw it with their own eyes. To everyone else, it was a joke. When they submitted it to the Pentagon, they turned it down, saying this has no, military value. What I'm saying, folks, is let's wake up. Let's be mature people, and let's realize it does seem like we have invisible neighbors who are intelligent, who can communicate with us, and let's stop treating it like a joke. Let's see a little science here.
Why do you think it was that Forrest is coming through so strongly? I mean, this seems to be more powerful of an emanation than you normally get with these things.
What I give him credit for is two things. And this is what Richard Matheson said, the great science fiction writer who wrote What Dreams May Come and Somewhere in Time, because he knew Fari, and he's heard this whole case, and he said, yeah, Paul, Fari, this is coming from Fari. I believe Fari's been in touch with you. And Fari did not believe in life after death. He debunked it. He scoffed at it. He made fun of it. But he did say, "I'll drop you a line if it's real." And, this is Richard Matheson's words. He said, Paul, he he discovered he was wrong, and he found a practical way to let you know that, that he didn't agree anymore with the things that he had said then. And he dropped you a line, literally dropped me a line on a document. So that's one point, that he was letting it be known. And of course, those who adhere to his atheism and knew him as an atheist and who don't believe in life after death still feel that I've stepped over a line and that I've done something tasteless, because he's not here to defend himself, that there is no life after death anymore. I'm putting words in his mouth. I'm accused of everything. Right. But the point is, Fari was very forward-thinking. This is where you have to give him great credit. He was a futurist. He was Mr. Science Fiction. He was Mr. Sci-Fi back when it wasn't respectable. He and Ray Bradbury were considered kooks because they believed that man would set foot on the moon in their lifetime. And he, through science fiction, promoted all of these futuristic ideas of man's glorious future, that we had a long way to go, but that we would go to the stars, and we would have all kinds of technology and machine that were unthinkable. And, he was born in 1916, and so he promoted everything that spoke to man's advancement to where we've got to get to in order to have knowledge, more knowledge, more knowledge. And I think that's why he's doing it. I think it's a contribution to mankind. He's stepping, and Gary Schwartz says, let's remember to thank him. Has anybody thanked him for this? It's not just that there's this evidence popping up and surprise visits, but he's doing something constructive that I've learned from. I've gone about it with due diligence. I've gone to some of the top scientists in the country, and if the debunkers want to take me over the coals, just let them try, because every word I've told you is true, and that's what's going to stand up in the end.
Now, do you think he's responsible for the synchronicities, or do you think the synchronicities are something else?
Boy, it's a tough question. I don't think he's a time traveler. So some of these things that the seeds for them were printed, like there was a painting of him made. That is the painting of the cover of our DVD. You'll see it when you get the DVD. There's a clock behind him with the hands at 2 minutes to midnight, which happened to be exactly the time that he died on December 4th of 2008, 2 minutes to midnight. So, Michael Shermer of the Skeptic Society says, Paul, so what happened? He knew when he was going to die, and he influenced the hand of that artist to put the hands of the clock right there so it would all come out just right. Is that what you think? And I have to say, I don't know. There are so many intertwinings here. We could be getting echoes and ripple. The present could be receiving echoes and ripples from some future events, maybe. Physicist Michio Kaku isn't going to buy that, but these are still open questions. Well, but science needs to come up with these theories and answers, not a film producer from Hollywood. I'm reporting on what I've witnessed.
It may also be that reality isn't quite what we think it is.
Yeah.
We look at it as a very cut and dry, we move from past to future, and everything is just in a single line, and nothing can reflect back or forward, and things are only connected very, very tenuously. And maybe that's not the case. Maybe things are far more morphic and move in much different directions than we realize.
Maybe the Chinese were reflecting the basic nature of reality when they invented the Chinese puzzle box, where you have a box within a box within a box within a box. So it's let's acknowledge life's great mysteries, and let's acknowledge that maybe someday we, with work, can understand these things we don't understand, instead of ignoring them and pretending that there are no ghosts. Charles Dickens maybe knew what he was talking about with The Christmas Carol, and so did Shakespeare.
Now, I think the key is to get rid of the reductionist, materialist way of looking at things and understand there's more out there than can be found by just breaking something down into its pieces.
Yes. Gary Schwartz tells me there is a term for what we were trying to do here, and it's called post-materialist science.
Nice.
We've moved on from the purely materialist reductionism And we're allowing for the fact that the evidence that's out there that people have put different names to, like spirit, ghost, angel, poltergeist, prophecy, that all of it may connect to a larger reality in ways that we can't see, and that's post-materialist science to study that.
Nice. All right. So your website for this documentary is what?
lifeafterdeathproject.com.
And that is the only place people can get the DVD at the moment.
Right now, yeah. I mean, it's $24.95, and you get 2 DVDs. You get the movie, and you get the sequel, plus 40 minutes of bonus features that have Ray Bradbury and Rick Baker. It's a beautiful package. 4 years of work for me, and I welcome everybody's support on this. I really do.
Okay, and you have a few other websites as well.
Oh, yes. I'm an artist, so you'll want to go to pauldavids-artist.com, and you'll see a couple hundred of my works there, and oil paintings, and pen and ink, and pastel, and materials work that I do in a collaboration with Russell Metzger. We're going to have some of our works in the Ritz in Laguna Beach. And then there is, I do funny stuff at hackharddrive.com, which I do for poetry and satire. And pauldavids.com, it has all my movies, and books. You find everything there. Jesus in India, the movie.com. It's about the Jesus in India movie. I did a Latino film that deals in part with Our Lady of Guadalupe, a very moving story with an all-Hispanic cast, and that is beforeweSayGoodbye.com.
All right.
So a lot of stuff.
And what do you have coming up next?
That's a tough one to answer. I think a long vacation, and Gary Schwartz has really been urging me to write a book about this Fari case with him. So that I will put down everything that has happened, and he'll also bring his perspective to it, and his role in investigating the science and attempting the direct communication. So yeah, that book is going to be high on the list of things I'm going to do.
Nice. All right. Well, I thank you. The documentary was excellent. I was pleasantly surprised when I watched it. It was very well done, and the information is significant, I guess is the right word for it.
Thank you.
So
thank you. It's not just weird news in the Huffington Post, right?
Exactly. You know what? There's more evidence for this than there is for the Higgs boson. So let's look at it that way.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll take that Nobel Prize. I'll also take the $1 million from skeptic James Randi, by the way. He's offered that for anybody with proof of paranormal. So,
yeah, but
James, when you visit me, bring your checkbook.
Yeah, good luck getting that. All right. Well, thank you, Paul. And Last Exit for the Lost is up next, taking you out with some Psyche Corporation.